Any parent would be outraged if they knew that their child was a victim of crime, and I think any community would be very concerned if there were high levels of crime in their neighborhood. So a key question we have to ask is, what risk do young people who are homeless face in terms of crime and victimization? In our report, Surviving Crime and Violence, we conducted research on exactly this topic. This research was conducted with Justice for Children and Youth, and I did it in partnership with Bill O'Grady, who's at the University of Guelph. What we did is we conducted interviews with 244 young people who experienced homelessness. We went to a series of street youth serving agencies in the City of Toronto and conducted interviews covering a whole range of topics, including basic information about their lives, their experience on the streets, their experience as victims of crime, and their relations with the police in Toronto. This was done in 2009, and this report that we're releasing now is the first of two reports that are going to come out of this project. The findings of this research reveal that street youth are victimized quite frequently, and it's actually the condition of being homeless that puts them in the situation of being vulnerable to crime. Here are the key findings from our research. The first is that when you compare young people who are homeless to young people who are housed, street youth are much more likely to be victims of virtually all kinds of crime and violence. In a given year, 25% of Canadians report being victim of some kind of crime, and in most cases it's a single incident. With our street youth survey, we found that 76% of street youth were victims of crime in the past 12 months, and that the vast majority of them were victims on more than one occasion. The second finding we found is that when homeless youth are victims of crime, the networks of support that they can rely on are weak. Typically, if one's a victim of a crime, one relies on family, the police, perhaps teachers, social workers. One has a whole network of people around them to help them work through that experience, which can be quite traumatic. When young people are homeless, that network of people shrinks quite dramatically, and they're forced to rely on themselves more than they should, given the harshness of what they're experiencing. A third thing we found is that young people who are homeless have a real difficult time in taking measures to protect themselves. You don't have a door to lock, there aren't a lot of resources that you can use to protect yourself, and you're also thrust into public places and spaces that make you particularly vulnerable to crime. So maintaining your safety is really difficult when you're young and homeless. The fourth point is that young women in particular are much more likely to be victimized than our young men. And this is a pretty startling finding. Young women report higher levels of victimization in terms of most types of crime, but particularly in terms of violent crime. 38% of our sample reported being victims of sexual assault in the previous 12 months. In addition to that, young women also report high rates of partner abuse. And this is when you compare young women who are homeless to young women who are housed. And the partner abuse that occurred in the previous 12 months may in fact lead to homelessness, but it also may occur once people are on the streets. When you put these two factors together, the situation for young women who are homeless is pretty serious, and I think we need to address that through policy and services. Another key finding is that the younger you are and the earlier you leave home, the more vulnerable you are to criminal victimization. So what we found is that young people between 16 and 18 are much more likely to be victims of crime. Point and result of our research is there are ways to address this problem, but the solutions lie in terms of how we deal with homelessness. What we did is we also thought about solutions, right, that can be applied both in terms of policy, but also in terms of how we deliver street youth services. If we want to truly deal with the issues of young people who are homeless, and if we are really concerned about their safety, then we need to change the way we deal with youth homelessness. We need a strategic approach that works on prevention, that helps young people before they become homeless and gives them alternatives to households where they're experiencing violence, but also gives them alternatives to fleeing to the streets. We also need to work very proactively when young people do become homeless to help them get into the appropriate housing with the right kind of support so that they can move on with their lives. So in this report, we put together a list of very concrete recommendations that the federal government, the province of Ontario, and the City of Toronto can undertake in order to address youth homelessness, and in doing so, address the situation that they're facing in terms of being victims of crime. Everybody needs a safe place to live, and everybody needs a place where they can protect themselves. You can't underestimate the importance of having a door that you can close and lock, and we need to be able to provide that for all young people, regardless of their poverty or their housing status. Well, Bill O'Grady and I are also working on a second report coming from this project with Justice for Children and Youth, and this report will focus on the experience of street youth in engaging police and the justice system. I'm also involved in projects looking at pandemic planning and homelessness, and looking at effective ways to do program evaluation in the homelessness sector.